Today's case takes us to Edinburgh, the beautiful capital of Scotland. More specifically, back to 2010. This story centers around Suzanne Pilley, a 38-year-old woman who was deeply loved by everyone around her. She was super close to her parents, talked to them multiple times a day, and was always checking in on them. She was also one of those people who could make you smile instantly, loyal to her friends, warm, funny, and always in good spirits. Suzanne liked keeping herself busy with things that made her happy. She was a huge fan of festivals, loved to read, and took part in local book clubs and charity events. She also volunteered whenever she could, helping out around the neighborhood or lending a hand at fundraisers. In 2004, she married Peter Durand, a lifelong friend, in Las Vegas. The marriage didn't last long, though. They split in 2008, but they stayed on good terms. Sadly, her love life after that got pretty rocky. She got engaged to a guy, but things ended badly when she found out he was struggling with a cocaine addiction. Later, she ended up in a relationship where she suffered physical abuse. Even with all that, she tried her best to keep moving forward. Eventually, she found some stability working as an accountant for a company called Infrastructure Managers Limited. She handled payroll and accounting. Her co-workers described her as the kind of employee every company dreams of, never late, never called in sick, and always on top of her work. On Tuesday, May 4th, 2010, the day started off just like any other. At 8:19 in the morning, Suzanne left her apartment on Wiston Road to catch the bus to work. First she got on the number 2, then switched to the number 4 at Stevenson Drive. That day she was wearing a striking bluish-purple coat, carrying her shoulder bag, and had a water bottle in hand. At 8:49 she got off the bus. From there she just had to walk a few blocks to her office on Thistle Street. Almost every morning she'd stop at Sainsbury's to grab a quick breakfast, and that Tuesday wasn't any different. She paid for her things, texted her dad, and sent a message to her mum thanking her for feeding her cat Mercury the night before. Suzanne had spent the night at her new boyfriend Mark's place. After that, she walked off toward the office, but never made it there. Since Suzanne was super punctual, her co-workers got worried right away when she didn't show up. They tried calling her, but when they got no response, they reached out to her parents later that same day. Everyone agreed. Something didn't feel right. By 8 p.m., she was officially reported missing. When police checked her apartment, everything was perfectly in place. Nothing was missing. Her money, her meds, her passport, all there. Her bank accounts were untouched, and there were no signs she'd left willingly. Plus, she hadn't made arrangements for anyone to feed her cat or her fish, which was really unlike her. For people who knew her well, that was a huge red flag that something was seriously wrong. The police started combing through every security camera in the area. They reviewed around 84 different video clips. They were able to spot her clearly in some of the footage. There was even a blurry shot of her walking just seconds away from her office. But after that, nothing. She didn't appear on any other camera. To make things worse, the building where she worked didn't have internal security cameras. The last confirmed sighting of Suzanne was at Sainsbury's buying her breakfast. She left the store, walked down Thistle Street, and vanished. That was the last time she appeared on any camera. The next day, the police stepped up the investigation. They searched her office, went back through her apartment, and started talking to nearby businesses in case anyone had seen something odd. The only thing that stood out was a taxi that had been parked near where Suzanne was last seen, just 5 minutes before her shift was supposed to start. They didn't think the driver was involved, but maybe he had seen something off. Turns out it didn't lead anywhere. So from there, the investigation focused on people close to Suzanne. Police interviewed family, co-workers, friends, everyone in her circle. They wanted to know who she'd seen recently, where she'd gone, whether she'd had any arguments. One of the first people they looked into was Mark, the guy she had spent the night with, but he was ruled out pretty quickly. That's when something interesting came up. Before dating Mark, Suzanne had been in an on-and-off relationship for almost a year with someone who, apparently, worked at the same company as her. That detail pushed detectives to take a much closer look at her workplace. As the investigation moved forward, one thing became more and more clear. Someone knew her routine really well and had planned the exact moment and place to intercept her. The fact that she disappeared in broad daylight, in a busy area without a trace. That's what really stood out to the detectives, and that's how one of the most chilling missing person cases in Edinburgh began. Turns out, the guy Suzanne had been involved with was David Gilroy, one of her co-workers. But David wasn't just any employee. He had a pretty solid background. He spent over 10 years in the Royal Navy, where he reached the rank of Chief Petty Officer. After that, he became a regional operations manager at Infrastructure Managers Limited, the same company where Suzanne worked. Thing is, David was married and had 2 kids. At one point, he and his wife Andrea had separated temporarily, and during that time he moved in with Suzanne. They were together for several months, although people close to them said the relationship was anything but stable, constant ups and downs, lots of arguments. Peter, Suzanne's ex-husband, said she had told him she was dating someone but never mentioned who. He was shocked to find out it was a married man, since that just wasn't like Suzanne. But he also admitted that when she fell for someone, she really went all in. On May 6th, David was interrogated by police for 11 straight hours. He eventually admitted that, yes, he and Suzanne had been in a relationship, but claimed it ended back in December. According to him, he had gotten back with his wife and kids and was now focused on rebuilding his marriage. He also said Suzanne had moved on and that there were no loose ends between them. But something stood out to the investigators: visible scratch marks on his arms and hands. When they asked him about it, they noticed some of the scratches were covered with makeup. The officers took photos and documented everything. David worked in the same office as Suzanne, and on May 4th, the day she disappeared, he did show up for work, but several co-workers noticed something off about him. They said he arrived later than usual, looked sweaty, nervous, shaky, like he was completely out of it with really dilated pupils. It didn't add up. A few people also noticed marks on his skin, but no one asked him directly. While the search for Suzanne was still ongoing, David called the police to report a break-in. According to him, someone had entered his house while he was sleeping and stolen only 2 things: his laptop and his phone. He said he and his wife had heard a noise during the night, went downstairs to check, and found the back door broken. But police thought the story had a lot of holes. It just didn't sound believable, and it happened conveniently a few days after Suzanne went missing. Plus, the only stolen items were the ones that could contain incriminating digital evidence. Didn't seem like a random burglary. Why not take anything else if there were valuables in the house? And why only the phone and laptop? They couldn't get into David's phone, but they did manage to recover data from Suzanne's. What they found completely contradicted his version of events. There were messages where she clearly told him it was over, that she was seeing someone else, Mark, and asked him to please stop contacting her. She had also texted a friend saying it felt like David was trying to force his way back into her life, and that she had even seen him the weekend before she went missing. But the most shocking part? The insane number of texts David had sent her. Literally hundreds in just a few weeks. On one single day, he messaged her 64 times. Some were like, "Hey Suzanne, are you okay?" Others were more intense, almost desperate. "Please answer me. I just want to talk to you. Do you need a ride somewhere?" He even told her he would always love her. On May 3rd, just one day before Suzanne disappeared, he sent her 15 messages and called her several times. He left a voicemail saying he missed her and really needed to talk. But the weirdest thing, from May 4th onward, David didn't send a single message. For someone who was basically digitally stalking her, who couldn't go an hour without texting, suddenly radio silence, like he already knew there wouldn't be any more replies. Everyone who knew about their relationship said it was super toxic, full of drama, fights, and emotional control. David was possessive, jealous, and manipulative. There were episodes of emotional abuse, intimidation, all classic red flags. Just a few weeks before she vanished, Suzanne had changed the locks on her apartment because she didn't feel safe anymore. And that wasn't all. A month before she disappeared, David managed to get into her email account, broke into her home through the kitchen window, and took her phone without permission. Suzanne told some close friends about it, though she never filed an official police report. All of these signs, all that behavior, started to paint a picture that the police couldn't ignore anymore. The ex, who claimed he'd moved on, had never actually let her go. Suzanne was reported missing by her parents the same day they last saw her. A little over 2 weeks went by without any news, and then the police dropped a bombshell. They were no longer treating it as a simple missing persons case. They were now investigating a possible murder. The day after that announcement, a massive search operation kicked off in the Argyll area, covering a huge area, around 400 square miles. The detectives on the case had already been working on it for a while, and now they were throwing everything they had into reviewing surveillance footage. More than 250 cameras spread across the city. They were desperate to piece everything together and figure out what really happened. And that's when David, Suzanne's ex, became the main suspect. Based on his messages, it was obvious he hadn't taken the breakup well. Everything pointed to him not being able to let go, and it looked like he'd been planning something. On May 4th, David dropped his daughter off at school early, hopped on a bus, and got to Thistle Street at 8:36 a.m. By 8:40, he was logged into his work computer. He waited there until he spotted Suzanne heading into the office. Somehow he managed to get her to go with him into the underground parking garage of the building. That's where, according to police, a heated argument broke out, possibly very intense. And they believe that's where he killed her, most likely by strangulation. After that, he dragged her body to a fire escape. Between 9:15 and 9:20, he was already back in the office acting like nothing had happened. But co-workers noticed something was off. He seemed off, uncomfortable. Even though he'd come in by bus, he suddenly made up a story about needing to go home to pick up his car. Then he made a super weird change to his work schedule. He moved a school visit he had planned for the weekend up to the very next day. That trip would take him to a small rural town in Argyll, more than 200 kilometers, about 125 miles, away. In theory, he was supposed to go with a co-worker, but then said that wouldn't be necessary. He'd go alone. All of it was sketchy. None of it made sense. After leaving the office, security cameras from a nearby store caught him buying 4 cans of air freshener. Then he grabbed a cab to his mum's house, who drove him back to his place. He stayed there for a while, then later returned to work. He made several trips back and forth to the parking garage until, during one of those trips, he moved Suzanne's body into the trunk of his car. That same night, like nothing had happened, he went to a school concert and had dinner at a restaurant with his wife and kids. When he got home, he parked the car in the driveway, with Suzanne's body still in the trunk. The next morning, he got in the car and drove off to the school meeting he had rescheduled. He arrived there around 4:30 p.m., but the timing didn't make sense. If he left around 11:30 a.m., so why did it take him so long to get there? Investigators realized there were a couple of hours in that drive that just couldn't be explained. On top of that, he used way more gas than usual, which suggested he either took a long detour or left the engine running for a long time. And the craziest part, the drive back to Edinburgh, which should have taken around 40 minutes, somehow took him almost 2 hours. Police are convinced that somewhere during that missing time, David got rid of the body. He also turned off his phone for several hours, and before heading back, he stopped at a gas station to fill up. When they checked his car, they noticed something odd. The umbrella that was always on the back seat had been moved to the trunk. They believe he moved it when he put Suzanne's body in there. They brought in cadaver dogs trained to detect human remains. While they didn't find any DNA, the dogs did alert to 3 key spots. 1 in the parking garage and 2 in the trunk of his car, a Vauxhall Vectra. The inside of the car also reeked of cleaning products, which raised even more red flags. When they examined the vehicle further, they found that the suspension and wheels were pretty banged up, like he'd been driving on dirt roads or through rough terrain. There were also branches and leaves stuck under the car's undercarriage, which backed up the theory that he had driven to some remote area, exactly the kind of place someone would go to hide a body. All of this, the surveillance footage, the timeline of his movements, the suspicious behavior, the sudden schedule changes, and even the way he acted around his family, it all lined up. David couldn't handle the fact that Suzanne didn't want to be with him anymore. And worse, he planned the whole thing out coldly, methodically. And the sickest part? He really thought he could get away with it. At one point in the investigation, a new theory emerged, that David had been in a wooded area. Authorities started asking the public to report any sightings of a vehicle matching a certain description. They said things like, We're looking for information on a car that may have been spotted parked on rural roads, forest trails, or just off the highway. It's a silver family-sized car, kind of cylindrical in shape. We don't need the exact license plate. We just really need to know where it was seen. Suzanne always took the same route to work. It was part of her routine. That morning wasn't any different. Her parents had been in touch with the police and were getting updates as the case progressed. They were completely devastated. Deep down, they had been expecting the worst, but it still hit hard when they heard that police believed Suzanne had been murdered and likely buried somewhere in the Scottish Highlands. From then on, all search efforts focused on the Argyll Forest area. Investigators asked the public to think hard. Had they seen a car like that? Maybe just a man inside, parked somewhere odd, facing the woods. Any little detail could help. Suzanne's family, meanwhile, was completely shattered. Her dad admitted that they had feared the worst for a while, and even though it was hard to say it out loud, they knew things weren't looking good. Still, they chose to keep supporting the police through it all. 1 month after Suzanne was last seen, 47-year-old David Gilroy was officially charged with murder and with attempting to cover up the crime scene. Despite that, he was released on bail. He also faced charges for domestic abuse against his wife, Andrea, between January 2009 and May 2010, as well as for threatening his 2 kids. Those charges were eventually dropped. One of the most disturbing allegations was that he had threatened to stab a guy named Scott after Scott confronted him outside Suzanne's apartment. And yet, both David's family and his wife defended him. According to them, David had ended things with Suzanne and was trying to repair his marriage. They claimed she was the one who wouldn't let go, that she was obsessed with him. But none of that lined up with the facts. His suspicious route, the damage to his car, and the so-called random inspection, scheduled right next to a remote, inaccessible area, all of it raised serious red flags. It wasn't a coincidence. Most of the search efforts focused on the Argyll Forest Park, a massive, wild area full of rough terrain and dense vegetation. And that was exactly where David had arranged his last-minute work appointment. The most logical conclusion? Suzanne was out there somewhere, but with over 400 square miles to search, filled with thick forest, cliffs, and unreachable spots, the mission was overwhelming. Rescue teams and volunteers joined the police. There was hope that finally they could find her body and bring closure to her loved ones. The rugged beauty of the place clashed with the emotional weight of the search. Mountain units, rescuers, and dozens of volunteers joined in. Police had already interviewed over 1,500 people potentially connected to the case, and still, no solid trace of Suzanne. No one could understand how someone could just vanish like that, like the earth had swallowed her whole. Robert, Suzanne's dad, still hoped the search would be expanded that weekend. He said that even if he didn't say it out loud, he knew his daughter probably wasn't alive anymore, but he wanted to find her. He needed to know where her body was so he could truly grieve. Sometimes you feel like if you could just close that chapter, maybe the pain would be a little easier to carry. But some things feel impossible to reach, he said. Day after day, teams kept combing the mountains, but it was like looking for a needle in a haystack. No one wanted to give up, and even though police had gathered enough evidence to charge David, without Suzanne's body, the pain remained unbearable for everyone. Despite over 1,000 witness statements, Suzanne still hadn't been found. The Crown Office assigned 3 full-time prosecutors to the case, acknowledging how unusual and tough it would be to bring it to trial. They knew they'd be relying almost entirely on circumstantial evidence. There was no DNA, no murder weapon, not even a body. But they moved forward anyway. David Gilroy maintained his innocence. Finally, in February 2012, his trial for murder and obstruction of justice began. He chose not to testify, which immediately raised eyebrows. The district attorney explained that even without a smoking gun, the collection of all the elements, the footage, the timeline, the contradictions, his behavior, painted a clear picture. Each piece of evidence on its own might not mean much, but when you put it all together, the case is strong, said one of the prosecutors. The jury saw how David Gilroy had shown obsessive, possessive, and jealous behavior in the days leading up to Suzanne's disappearance, and how afterward he acted coldly, with a level of precision that felt rehearsed. He had sent her hundreds of messages, constantly harassed her, and when she finally told him it was truly over, he killed her. From that moment on, every single move he made was part of a calculated plan to hide the crime and make it seem like nothing had happened. It wasn't just violent, it was methodical. That's the picture the jury saw. David's wife, Andrea, was called as a witness by the prosecution, but by law, she had the right to refuse to testify against her husband, and that's exactly what she did. She stayed silent. During the trial, prosecutors presented all the security footage showing David's movements, along with phone records and geolocation data. A forensic expert testified that the scratches and marks on David's body were completely consistent with someone trying to fight off a strangulation, like Suzanne had tried to hold on, to fight for her life. In the end, David Gilroy was found guilty of murdering Suzanne Pilley. He continued to deny everything, right up to the verdict. Detective Gary Flanagan, one of the lead investigators, said it was one of the most complex cases he had ever worked on. We're talking about a crime that started in the heart of Edinburgh and very likely ended in a remote area on the other side of the country. That alone tells you how difficult this case was. According to him, the use of surveillance footage was crucial. It helped build the timeline and supported all the circumstantial evidence. In cases like this, where there's no confession and no body, every piece matters. The CCTV was the backbone that helped hold everything together, he explained. Although everything pointed to Suzanne's body being buried somewhere in Argyll, not even the massive search operations were able to find her. Police spent months searching roads, mountains, forests, with the help of rescue teams, volunteers, and even cadaver dogs. They stayed in close contact with the Pilley family throughout the entire process. They were transparent about the paths they took, the methods they used, and the areas they searched. But even after all of that, the final answer never came. Suzanne was still missing, and that was the hardest part of all. We made a promise to Rob, Sylvia, and Gail that any new lead, no matter how small, would be followed up. We haven't closed the door. The search is still alive, said one of the officers. Suzanne's parents, relatives, and friends celebrated the verdict. They felt some relief knowing that justice had been served. But at the same time, they knew they couldn't truly rest until her body was found. For them, the fight wasn't over. The verdict came in by majority vote. David Gilroy was convicted of murder and for attempting to obstruct justice. And this trial made history. For the first time in the UK, TV cameras were allowed to record the moment the sentence was read in a criminal court, and it aired the very same day. The entire country watched as the punishment was handed down. Suzanne Pilley was deeply loved by her co-workers. She worked in an accounting office on Thistle Street, and everyone described her as kind, professional, and dedicated. The day she vanished, she left her house like always, with her backpack and her headphones, ready for another regular day at work. No one knew that would be the last time anyone would see her. In 2010, Suzanne was ready to turn her life around. Part of that change meant ending things for good with David Gilroy. On May 4th, she left for work like it was any other day, but she never made it there. During the trial, the jury was convinced that the circumstantial evidence was more than enough. David had killed Suzanne and gotten rid of her body. When the judge delivered the sentence, he didn't sugarcoat anything. For the crime of murder, I sentence you, as the law requires, to life in prison. You will serve a minimum of 18 years before being eligible for parole. This sentence is effective from March 13, 2012. Suzanne's family released a statement that was read on their behalf. It was heartbreaking, but also strong. This day was a long time coming, but justice for Suzanne has finally arrived. We lost our daughter, but her memory lives on in everyone who loved her. Suzanne was a dedicated woman, a loyal friend, and a model professional. She loved nature, going for walks, riding her bike. She truly enjoyed life. We are grateful to the police and prosecution team for never giving up, but our pain remains because we still haven't been able to say goodbye to her the way she deserves. After sentencing, David was moved to a different prison for his own safety. He received threats, and at one point was beaten so badly he suffered a broken jaw. He tried to appeal the verdict, but the Court of Appeal shut him down. He also tried to take his case to the UK Supreme Court, That failed too. By February 2019, all legal options were exhausted. Meanwhile, the Pilley family kept hoping. For them, real peace would only come when Suzanne's body was found. Even though justice had spoken, the pain of not knowing where she was remained unbearable. Her father, Rob, passed away without ever getting the answer he'd spent years looking for. Chief Inspector Bob Williamson, who worked closely on the case, made it clear, "We're still hoping someone someday will realize that little thing they remember, that detail, could be the key. This family has endured too much. This investigation won't close until Suzanne is found." Yes, the verdict brought relief. Yes, there was justice. But it wasn't closure. For those who loved Suzanne, nothing is truly resolved as long as she's still missing. As the lead investigator put it, the door's still slightly open. It hasn't fully shut. On David's side, his family kept insisting the whole thing was a miscarriage of justice. They claimed he was innocent, but over time, every legal avenue was shut down. Now, 14 years after the crime, Suzanne's family and friends are still waiting for the day they can bury her with dignity. And even though the law did its job, the grieving hasn't ended. Because when someone vanishes like this, what you need most, beyond justice, is closure. As expected, the whole ordeal put a massive emotional strain on Suzanne's loved ones. Bringing her home and giving her a proper burial would mean everything. In 2024, Crime Watch renewed its public appeal. Her mother Sylvia and her sister Gail are still fighting with all they've got to keep the search alive. They're still holding on to hope that one day they'll be able to bring her home. "It's unbearable not knowing where she is," said Gail. "Not being able to say goodbye, not giving her a place to rest. It's like they still haven't restored even a bit of her dignity after everything she went through." And the truth is, at the time this episode is being recorded, Suzanne's remains have still not been found. David Gilroy, convicted of her murder, still refuses to say a single word about where her body is, but that silence might come at a cost. A new bill, known as the Suzanne's Law, has been proposed by the Scottish government. If passed, it would ensure that a convict's refusal to disclose the location of a victim's body would be directly factored into parole decisions, because right now, that's just considered an optional detail, something the parole board may or may not take into account. David Swindle, former superintendent and the man behind the capture of serial killer Peter Tobin, had this to say about the proposal. "It's so basic. If you don't cooperate, you shouldn't get parole. Scotland's never had anything like this. In England and Wales, there's Helen's Law, but here, nothing. Families deserve better, and if this law passes, it's going to make a real difference for them. Cases like Suzanne's are already hard enough. Losing someone this way is a wound that never fully heals. But when you don't even know where your loved one is, it adds another layer of pain. It's like a silent torture that never ends." Gail, Suzanne's sister, said it best, "We know Suzanne was murdered, and we believe the right person is behind bars, but we don't feel like we've truly said goodbye. Not really. Until we find her body, that's just not going to happen." Scottish police say they're committed to following up on any new leads, and they won't officially close the investigation until Suzanne is found. "Please," said Gail, "if there's anyone out there who knows something, even the smallest thing, and hasn't come forward, think about Suzanne. Don't do it for us. Do it for her. Give her the rest she deserves." And it's with that plea that this story remains open. No matter how many years go by, as long as her body remains missing, justice will never feel complete. If you appreciated this story and want to help us keep creating more like it, don't forget to leave a like, comment, share, and subscribe to the channel. Your support means the world to us.